grateful for his service. Here's Congressman Burgess from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex being told about this area of the river by a constable from that county. It's actually a county park where we were. You can't really see it, but right there in the middle of the screen, in the middle of the dam, you'll see the United States flag and the Mexican flag. And they have two officers sitting right next to one another operating the dam. The next thing we did is we drove from there to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Station in Weslaco, and they briefed us. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection has 40 counties which they look after, and here in Texas, 59,000 square miles. They have 9 stations and 5 different sectors: the Rio Grande Valley, where we were, Laredo, Del Rio, Big Bend, and El Paso. At the briefing there, primarily directed for the congressman, I was wondering if I was going to be able to get in and actually see the stations, but I was able to. They were very hospitable, and they gave us a good briefing. They noted that the Rio Grande Valley sector, Weslaco, McAllen, and I believe one other major, Brownsville, Mission, that area is the busiest sector in the United States. McAllen is actually the busiest station itself, and only followed by then Weslaco. They detain 53% of all the detainees in the United States. They have 3,049 agents assigned permanently to this sector, and they were asking for 700 more agents. 25% of the detainees come from Mexico. The rest of them, often referred to as OTMs or other than Mexicans, come from, of course, Central America, which we'll talk more about, but also countries including China, Syria, Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. Those were instances which they noted. And so there's not been a lot from those areas, but they have had them. They do take the fingerprints of the detainees, and they check to make sure they haven't been in a battlefield in Iraq or Afghanistan or another part of where war on terrorism is going on. They're responsible for the 56 non-contiguous miles of fencing along the border. They also employ remote video. And they noted also that California and Arizona also have a lot more infrastructure than Texas does. They seek to be primarily focused on criminal enterprises, but they've been, of course, overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis with so many children coming from Central America. And the focus is primarily on the Anzalduas Dam south. Oh, I almost did it. Sorry. I was trying to do that. Okay. Okay. Try again. Sorry about that. This didn't happen when we practiced. But, anyway, tell me I need to move quicker. Why are the children coming? 50% of the detainees are either unaccompanied children or family units. The reason why is this is the shortest route from Central America by train. There are bus routes and highways to the region. They're heavily populated areas on both sides of the border, and there's lots of agricultural land, which we've noted. Interesting enough, I found this on the internet. This is a photograph of a sign at a shelter or a migrant, a poster for migrants in Mexico pointing the quickest ways to Texas. Or is Pawnee, or is that in Central America? What's it say there? Anyway, it's either in Central America or in Mexico. Here's a Google map, and if you look carefully, you can see in the light green all the different protected land. Some of those are state parks. We have access to those, but the federally protected lands we have only limited access to. So why are they coming? Why are the children and families coming now to South Texas? Well, the primary reason that was stated there is that the violence in Central America, and they have some of the highest murder rates in the world, particularly in Honduras. There's sexual assault, not only among criminals, but even family and neighbors. There's sexual slavery. Of course, many seek to reunify with their families here in the United States, and they're seeking opportunity. Primarily, which we'll talk more about in a minute, word-of-mouth advertising. Now, I wanted to show you some pictures that you may have seen on the internet. I was not allowed to take pictures, but I did want to confirm and try to show you what I could. This is the detention station associated with the Weslaco. Well, I don't know which one this is, but it looks like the several that I did witness in Weslaco, McAllen, and Del Rio. They're pretty much overwhelmed at times. Here you see them filing in to the rooms. They're pretty much like a county jail. This looks more like a Del Rio. In Del Rio, they only take in about, in 1 week, what McAllen takes in, or maybe a Weslaco in a day. They have individual cells in which they are segregated by sex or age, or mothers with infants and young children, or they're quarantined if they're found to have disease or some medical issues. If you note there in the back, there's just a short cinder block wall that separates the room from the toilet area. And those, I believe, are water bottles on the top of it. There's about 2 square feet in most instances when they've been overwhelmed for the number of detainees. When there's not enough room in the station while they're processing the hundreds that are coming, they leave them in the sally port. They have to sit on the concrete and lie down. In some instances, I saw mothers nursing their infants in Del Rio. So we're pretty much been overwhelmed. I do believe that Customs and Border Protection agents are seeking to be faithful and do a good job. But they've taken 40% of their people off watching the border to process these children. And one of the problems is once we process them, we don't have any place for the next step. There's only 100 beds. It's hard to believe. And they're in the northern United States for family units that are seeking asylum. So what they've been doing after we go through all this effort, we release them on their own recognizance. And they actually interpret that they're given a promise to appear and they sign it and they leave. But the promise to appear is like our traffic tickets. And they're supposed to go and show up in a few days or a month or a year, wherever they send them, before some immigration court. But our courts are completely even more overwhelmed than our customs stations. In McAllen, they have about 1,200 apprehensions per day over the last month. The day I went through the facility, they had a lull. They only had 500 that day, and they were surprised. Now, there may have been several reasons for that. One is they had the federal U.S. Judiciary Committee coming there, so I thought, well, maybe they shifted them to another station. I thought, the first thing I thought of was maybe the DPS surge is working. I do think it has been effective in deterring illegal crossings and criminal activity. The other thing, unfortunately, I learned about, I believe yesterday, is that there's been a train that derailed in South America with these children who ride on top of it. to get here. The McAllen unit has about 600 agents. We'll move on before my screen leaves me. This slide here, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. I will put it on the web. But it gives you a table of the apprehensions of unaccompanied children and family units. I combine them. Usually they're separated in the media. 20% of them generally are unaccompanied minors. About 30% are family units. And if you'll note there, in the group there, first section is Texas. And the farther northwest you go, Big Bend, Del Rio, there's not that many, even in El Paso. But down as we get to Laredo and the Rio Grande Valley, it just explodes exponentially. At about 18,000 in the Rio Grande sector in 2013. That's the first column, and 84,000 so far this year. This was at the end of June. And I just did a little math. If you look at the second column from the right, and I'm estimating about 132,000 unaccompanied minors and family units coming by the end of August of the fiscal year, which is about a 400% increase over prior years. Another interesting thing to note is that in California and Arizona, the number of apprehensions have actually decreased. So maybe we can learn from them. Another interesting fact is that this is not a new problem. We're certainly focused on it now, and it's been occurring over the last couple of years. Our governor sent a notice to the president in 2012 about what was happening. But it did happen before. If you look, the year that spiked there towards the left was 2005. So it's not a wholly new problem. And after that, of course, we had the recession in 2008 and 9. Perhaps there wasn't as much reason to come. This slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but shows the deportations from the United States from the year 2000 through the year 2013. 2000, we deported about 1.8 million people. And if you look in the first column, about 200,000, 188,000 were forced removals. The rest of them were encouraged to leave. They weren't actually forced, but apparently it was communicated and they did leave, and it was confirmed that they left. And under the present administration, you'll note that the number of deportations has dropped, not drastically initially, but significantly by the year 2013. Another interesting thing to note here is that the actual forced deportations in the first column did increase under President Obama's administration. After having the tour and the briefing by the Customs and Border Protection Agency, we went to a shelter in Los Fresnos. And there we saw, this is the place the children went to for about a week before they were reunified with families or relatives. This was run by a charitable organization that started in the mid-'80s. It contracts with the Office of Refuge and Resettlement, and they perform mental health screenings, and they contact the relatives, and they're in a pilot program now seeking to move about 200 children per week. 72 of the children while we were there were 13 to 17 years of age. 128 of them were 8 to 12 years of age. Yes. Yes, Terry.
What religious charity is it run by?
I believe this one is a Catholic charity. And it's been in place for a long time, since the mid-'80s. I thought it was the '70s, but when I double-checked it on the website, it said, I think, 1983. You can check that. It's International Educational Services. Did I miss? I think I skipped over that briefing slide. Kathy, where are you? Michael, did I do that earlier? But I'm going to keep going. Yeah. This is what this facility looks like. It's very well run and maintained. These are inside the little dormitories. They do seek to teach them English and different things. And if you'd like more information, I know a number of pastors and churches have reached out to me and asked for information about how they can help with the children, which are the unfortunately in the crosshairs of this problem. And here's some of the numbers you can contact and some of the websites, and I'll put this online. Anyway, that was just Tuesday. It was a full day. I got back late that night and had some time with my family. The next day we headed south from Padre and west. Can't go any farther east. And went through Port Isabel, and we came to the Palo Alto battlefield. And we went down to Brownsville and then over to McAllen, which I've already spoken about, and then up into Laredo and visited the port of entry. On the way there, we passed by the port of Brownsville and the shipyard. We stayed a little while at the battlefield there, where there's a national park now, Palo Alto. The interesting thing, and this was sobering, a good way to start the tour actually up the river, was the first battle of the United States-Mexican War occurred there on May 8, 1846. And the result of that U.S.-Mexican War was, among other things, the establishment of the Rio Grande River as the border between the United States and Mexico. From there we went south into Brownsville. We looked at the Veterans Bridge, most eastern border crossing, and then we went by and looked at the Brownsville Gateway Port of Entry. And we have about 28 legal border crossings in Texas. You can see there, most of them there are in the valley. Here's what downtown Brownsville looked like. I was there about 35 years ago, so I was interested to refresh my memory. It's a beautiful downtown area. The rest of it, here's UT Brownsville, looks pretty much like what we would see around here, except for the palm trees and palmettos. This is the Valley Baptist Medical Center. And then we headed to McAllen, about, I believe, 30 miles away, where we went to the station there. I've already spoken about that. Then we headed to Laredo, down US 83. And there we noted numerous DPS troopers working diligently, detaining, inspecting, and enforcing the law. And we're paying about $1 million per week for this surge, and officers are coming from around the state. It's required, it's not an option. One interesting thing I did see is at one intersection we stopped at, I looked to the left there and I saw this aerostat, or a tethered blimp, which they used for remote cameras to detect people crossing a large rural area, agricultural area, and then they look for the people as they travel different directions. Yes?
Maybe you'll cover this, but when a DPS officer encounters one of these people that are illegal, what do they do with them?
They basically turn them over to the United States Customs and Border Patrol agents. Now, if they're conducting a criminal activity, I mean, there will be other issues involved, but that's my understanding. Well, it's a civil penalty in most cases. It's a federal misdemeanor to illegal cross it. In some instances, it can be a felony. The problem is most of the time they don't catch them in the river. They don't catch them crossing the river. They catch them in Texas or the United States, and it's a difficult issue to pursue in a court. We'll come back to, I'm sure, more of these questions in a moment. Down there on the border, there are large corporations and their distribution centers. It's hard to see them, but one of these is Panasonic. And so it's a substantial international commercial area for there. We arrived at Laredo late in the day, but enough time to see day workers returning home to Mexico on the right, people still coming to Texas on the left there. This was located a short walk from our hotel. And there we were walking around the square, and we visited with this patrol agent and a couple of others. It was interesting, not this one, but others. Basically, he said, ask the tough questions. You could tell they wanted you, they were glad you were there and concerned. Here's a view from our hotel window. It's hard to see, but we're looking over into Mexico. Down underneath the freeway, you can see the patrol unit on our side of the Rio Grande. They're playing soccer on the other side, and there are also Mexican military vehicles going down the road. And not only were they playing soccer, but we had a little exercise there in the middle of the courtyard of the hotel. That's my daughter, Hannah. And what's interesting there is I was there at this hotel, and I remember it distinctly when I was about 6 years old with my parents. I remember those archways, and it was a beautiful hotel. And this area of Texas and the continent was settled very early on. This church was established in the late 18th century. Then Thursday, we traveled on to Del Rio and up to Seminole Canyon State Park and the Marathon north of the Big Bend. But before I left the hotel there in Laredo, while I was eating breakfast, I met the commissioner, the U.S. Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection. And I asked him why he was there. He was there launching an ad campaign for Central Americans that they were putting on buses and placards in Mexico and in Central America. And these are the words that he used to describe the campaign. If you do get to the U.S., you will not be put on a path to citizenship. There is no permissio. It is dangerous. The second part of the message was, it is a dangerous journey, and many lose their lives or being sexually or sexually assaulted. This man does work for our president's administration, but it was interesting to note here he supports the returning of children to the country of origin within 2 weeks, which is, I think, what the Corn and Quail bill is calling for. He's a personal friend of DPS Director Steve McCraw, and this was his 3rd trip to the border. From there we went on to Del Rio, and I did have to move quickly because I wanted to make my appointment. And we went up by Carrizo Springs, and as you travel north from any of the roads in the valley, you'll encounter a checkpoint where you're asked if you're a United States citizen. My dad, he was, if you know my dad, you'll see a picture of him, but he usually wears a hat. And he joked with him and said he was from Iraq. He asked, what will you do if I say I'm from Iraq? But they laughed and moved on. But in Del Rio, right before you get to the Bend, the Big Bend, it's an old city and a beautiful city, though small. I met with the county judge there, Laura Allen. She was very gracious and hospitable. She's a Republican, but I was introduced to her by a Democrat who used to be in the House of Representatives in Texas, Pete Gallega, who's now serving in Congress. Next to her was the director of the Chamber of Commerce, and then the county sheriff. He didn't want his picture shown, so we doctored that a little bit. And there was the emergency management coordinator, D.A. Bagley. The county judge showed me around the city and took me to the port of entry, showed me the border fence and the large, well-beaten footpath right next to it, showing the ineffective nature of our investment in and the fences, at least here in Texas, where we have a river as our border. From there, we actually went and had a lengthy lunch with several, including these two Border Patrol agents, who later then gave me a tour of the Del Rio Border Patrol Station. From there, we traveled to Seminole Canyon State Park, and which you enter the park a good ways from the border, but we went down beside Panther Creek to view the pictographs there, and the background there is actually the Rio Grande. That's where the creek runs into. Then on our way to Marathon, we noted one of the things we'd heard about. We saw one of the border agents dragging some tires or some other device behind his vehicle, and they do that so that they can see if there are any fresh footprints on the sandy roads. I couldn't get a hotel in Big Bend, so we stayed at the Historic Gage Hotel, which was very nice. The next day, on Friday, July 4th, we traveled down into the Big Bend National Park and on to Terlingua and Lajitas. And there we are at the entrance to the park. It's a beautiful park. I really recommend it. I know Glenn Evans has been there. It's stark, but beautiful. It's full of lush plants. They just received rain, and it was bringing everything back to life. And of course, the rugged mountains you could see in a vast landscape. One of the chief landmarks there is Santa Elena Canyon, which we took a brief walk down to, and there's a view of it from the middle of a convergence of a creek. I forget the name of it. Big part?
Terlingua Creek.
Terlingua Creek, thank you. Then my daughter and I, we got as close to Mexico as we could. And my feet were really hurting. I have a tenderfoot. From there we went to Terlingua, and I visited with the fire chief there and EMS personnel. They were having a fundraiser, and I talked to them about, of course, our problem with respect to using the dedicated funds for volunteer fire departments for other purposes as well as border security. Then we rested and were refreshed at a hotel in Lajitas. It was a beautiful old hotel. It used to be a city. It was basically just a resort now. The next day, Saturday, July 5th, we went over to Big Bend Ranch State Park, and we hiked the Closed Canyon Trail and visited the Warnock Center at Big Bend Ranch State Park. This was a sunrise there, looking out from the house we stayed in. Beautiful, but perhaps not quite as beautiful as the dark, starry, dark night and the beautiful skies that we saw lit up the night. Here's the Rio Grande. Lajitas, Texas on the left, and Lajitas, Mexico on the right. If you look carefully, you can see what's left of the little town there. They used to cross the 30-yard span of the river there, but now it's illegal to cross there, and they have to go about 40 miles either north to Presidio or south to the Boquilas crossing. Here's a better picture. Lajitas means small little rock, or rocks. Flat rock, excuse me. There on our way to the Closed Canyon, and we took a picture from the big hill overlooking there. We did a little gymnastics. I was okay at that instance, but another one I had to go grab my daughter. There we are in the Closed Canyon. There's the house we stayed in. The far mountains are basically on the right are Mexico. It's hard to tell though, but the ones on the left are Texas. A beautiful pavilion there at the hotel where my parents stayed. On Sunday, we actually went back into the Big Bend, went back to the east over to Boquilas Crossing before we headed west to Presidio. My wife and I saw the sunrise there. We couldn't get into the crossing. We're hoping to see that, but it was closed. The Border Patrol agent wasn't there yet. But we did go on down to an overlook. The crossing is actually in the far right. That's the legal crossing, in the far right corner. But there was another crossing, which I did see crossed while I was there, by a man, and he was attending this free trade zone, if you would. And if you look carefully on the right, you'll see him on a donkey. I saw him cross the river. But this down farther in the background there is a legal crossing that you can cross either by ferry. It's not much of a ferry. I think it's just a rowboat or a donkey, or you can wade. Anyway, went back all the way across the Big Bend and saw my cousin, who's a ranger at Big Bend Ranch State Park. Said goodbye to her. She and Representative Gallega had set up a lot of this part of the trip for us. On our way back, we traveled down the El Camino Real along the Rio Grande. It's one of the most scenic drives in America, said so by National Geographic. We saw these people canoeing down the river. Here's my dad looking west, or he's looking east, I'm looking west, and my daughter is, and with the Rio Grande in the background. And as we got close to Presidio, we noted the farmland, which is some of the oldest continuously farmed land in North America near Presidio. Here's their high school. There's a view of the downtown area as we entered. That's the City Hall on the right. Here's the port of entry. Notice the sign on the right. Not too friendly statement, and they take that seriously, as we know our serviceman is down there who crossed over the border accidentally with a firearm. But we do have a friendly welcome sign on the Texas side. It doesn't say welcome to the United States, it says welcome to Texas. And you can see there one of the travelers coming over from Mexico. I passed by the Mexican consulate as we traveled north on US 67. If you keep going, you can go all the way, I believe, to Texarkana. That is a long ways from there. We did see some immigrants, but they weren't from Mexico or Central America. They were from California. Can't read the license plate, but I did. Anyway, that's our trip with my family, immediate family, and my parents. Gives you a glimpse of what we saw. So it was a beautiful week, but it was sobering. I'd like now to just give you a quick recap of what I observed and thought about as I reflected on this. It almost took as much time to go over this, and